مرحبا. بعتقد صارت 5:30 وصار فينا نبلش.
صح.
بس بدي اتاكد. اوكي.
بعتقد صارت 5:30 وصار فينا نبلش. دارين بس صوتك عم بيشوش.
بعتقد ايه، خليني نجرب.
صوتك عم يشوش وبعتقد اذا انت فاتحه الكاميرا ما في صوره.
ومفروض عملت ريستارت للصوت. هلا افضل؟
ايه نعم، بس انت فاتحه الكاميرا ولا لا؟
ايه فاتحه الكاميرا. لا انا عندي الكاميرا مفتوحه.
ايه لانه مش مبين يعني مبين فلو هيك مغوش اذا كنت. هلا شفناك.
اوكي. بعتقد كنا عم نسمع الجلسة الماضية اللي خلصت بأسئلة.
I think that we have all been hearing the previous session, which concluded with questions that got to the heart of the questions we want to raise now.
شكوك وطروحات كانت عم تدور بخلفية مقاربتنا لموضوع طرابلس اللي بالاحتجاجات الأخيرة
Tripoli in the latest protests was presenting, was giving us a very exceptional picture or representation. The participants in the last session were saying there was no exception, but I think it was exception, especially when it comes to the expression of anger, something that we do not see in other regions. What is noteworthy is the paradox when we saw some violence and some people linked it to the roots and to the accumulation. And there is, on the other hand, the cliche that we always hear that it is the scene, it's the center stage for the political tug of war and clashes. But what is a fact is that the protesters were all the poor. So maybe poverty is the one fact that we can start from in order to understand what happened. Jana, a city journalist, Samer Hajar is a researcher and a university instructor. Samer, you were saying Tripoli is an open city, politically and security-wise. Why? How do you analyze this exceptional nature of the city? Good evening, Dareen. Good evening, everyone. Exceptional? Yes, it is exceptional in all sorts and all forms. And let me answer your question. Is it a city? Is it an open city politically and security-wise? But let me draw the right context for the last protest. Let's talk about pre, during, and post-protest. Before the protest, in the last 11 years, we had a very important period, 2011, 2013, which had seen many battles in Tripoli, leading to the destruction, to the collapse of the economy in Tripoli. Everyone was leaving Tripoli. Investors, people, it was a dread zone. No tourists would go to tourism. More importantly, the city was militarized. The sports stadium in Tripoli, you no longer see them as stadium or compound. You see military barracks. If you go and visit those schools that were built in Bibit Bene and the surrounding areas to address the issue of school dropouts, you will find military barracks. So Tripoli has become a militarized city, and all the inhabitants, many of the activists have been led to be implicated in fabricated security issues. So Tripoli and the situation in Tripoli is known to all throughout the years. And then 2019, with the unprecedented crisis, things exacerbated. In the recent protests, I stopped at two things. The children, look at the demography, age groups. And I tried to read into this. Why those young people are participating in these protests and with violence. Most of them participated in 2019 and 2020 protests, and they said, we want a just civil democratic state, but nothing happened. Yes, they expressed themselves through riots and violence, and I don't justify, but these are people who have no one to look after them. These are people who are seeing the highest percentage of dropouts, school dropouts, and unemployment in the whole of Lebanon. These are people who have relatives illegally migrating by sea to Turkey or to other countries. Thousands of young men in Tripoli are addicts now. They abuse drugs in front of children. So if we look at all this social explosion and the economic situation, it only makes it understandable for me what happened, and what is more logical, what happened after the protests. The political class, the political people bring like 21 suits before the military court to try civilians on charges of terrorism. Why? Because a young man had thrown a stone. Have you considered the sentence that those people would be given? It might be capital punishment, and they include underage. So this is how the state is dealing with those people. There is a very weird and exceptional political. Who is the political class? Can you tell me who's the political class? It's all the movements, on top of which a prime minister twice, who's on a famous TV interview, says, I am doing my job. I am doing what I can. I'm distributing the food rations and relief aid. So that sums up the political class. We have a failing political class. What happened in summary is only accepted and understandable because we have a state that does not look after the citizens in Tripoli. Tripoli, to wit, is a military barrack. There is no economy. All private sector enterprises have closed down in Tripoli. From summer 2019 till summer 2020, 250 economic enterprises have closed down in Tripoli in one street, Azmi and Mullah. And Tripoli against this backdrop, yes, it's only understandable that to see what happened in Tripoli. I believe what happened is just a mere rehearsal for what is to come. Tripoli is an exception, yes. Samer, I will take it from where you stopped, and let me welcome Mustafa Wikne, who has just joined. He is an activist in Tripoli. Mustafa, hunger did not stop. Marginalization did not cease to exist. Recovering Tripoli under the wing of the state, as we say in Arabic, did not happen. Why did we see an unprecedented violence recently, and why did it wind down? Is it because of the arrests? Is it because certain hidden messages were conveyed? In previous experiences, we have grown accustomed to see that political altercations, political clashes translate into activism on the ground. Correct. Thank you, and God bless you. What you're saying, Mrs. Dareen, is very important and very essential. If you go back like 6 years ago, everyone was watching how governments are being formed and how ministerial statements were written down after bloodshed in Tripoli. So political talks stall over shares, but then an absurd battle between Jabal Mahsen and Bibi Tibani would lead to the formation of the government, and those who die there would be no one to ask about them. 2 mosques also have seen incidents in Tripoli, and no one had asked questions about it. So what's happening now in Tripoli? You were asking why did they take to the streets, and why is this movement winding down? Those who were operating the battles between Jabal Mahsen and the Bani are now reoperating the movement. Who? Name them. I will name. We're talking here about security bodies taking orders from the politicians. So what happened in Tripoli recently? On 17 October, there was this kind of reconciliation between Tripoli and the state. First 10 days of the revolution, the whole media was just covering Tripoli. Tripoli was under the limelight. The quality, civil activism was all over the TV in Tripoli. And this is why we called Tripoli the bride of the revolution. 10 days into it, and maybe Dr. Khaled Ziede and Dr. Samer, as they are researchers, I called them to look into that situation, that fact, how the Noor Square just was the center stage of that reconciliation between the old city and the new city. The poor met with the rich, and everyone were calling for the same thing: security, stability, peace. So that reconciliation with the state and that coalition and solidarity and cohesion between the different factions and the segments of the society would not appeal to the warring political parties in the state. So this is how we had started to see exploitation of the revolutions. 10 days into it, we saw how security bodies taking orders from different political parties, they started to stand infiltrators, people to sabotage the revolution, pushing the rebels to stray from the core and from the key messages of the revolution, to tell the world that no, Tripoli did not reconcile with the state. So the state and the state representatives did not accept the fact that Tripoli and the people of Tripoli have transformed and are more accepted. And this is what we have seen in setting fire into the municipality building and the spiritual court. I agree with Dr. Sami. The anger of the people is pushing them to the streets. The lack of care, the poverty. Yes, but this would not make them set fire to the municipality and to the court. The cameras are there. And they were unmasked and they stayed over for more than 10 minutes. So you could see them. But unfortunately, everyone who was arrested later on were not part of those sabotagers and vandalizers. So how on earth are we arresting the civil protesters and leaving the vandalizers at large while we saw blood being let? 24 detainees are now being tried for terrorism. And also that takes us to another issue, that is the military court and how it deals with the file, with the issue of Tripoli. It's like reinforcing that idea that is the vision of the new generation to things. And Dr. Khalid Ziede was so right on what he mentioned. He was trying to be positive and he was shedding light on the role of Tripoli in building the Great Lebanon. Today, we have a new generation that is growing up to this idea that Tripoli is left by the state. Tripoli does not want the state. We need to pay special attention to this by the central government, because that might lead us to other options that unfortunately are now acceptable in Tripoli. If you conduct a survey in Tripoli, if you ask the question, under the current circumstances and under the current suffering, do you want Lebanon or not? The first answer you would get me any other nationality, and I would leave immediately. People are denying their identity, and this is scary. It gives us scary indicators for the future, scary prospects for the future. Where are we heading? The security plan, the security strategy at the time of the Tamam mandate. After that, there were discussions as to how we can reconcile Tripoli and the state, because at the time there was this propaganda to circulate the idea that Tripoli doesn't want state institutions, the army, the internal security forces. So a solution was proposed: recruit more than 2,000 young men and women from popular areas like Ibbe, Mankubin, those areas that were so damaged by the battles between Jabal Mahsen and Tibani. By recruiting those into the state institutions, we would have achieved more than one objective. First, we would restore and repair that relationship with the state, on the one hand, and second, we would buy in the loyalty of 2,000 families, and we would be pumping into those popular areas like 200 or 300 million in Lebanese pounds in the form of salaries to those recruits. Also, the indirect positive impact on their families, like social security, social safety, kind of economic stability, etc. Unfortunately, when the proposal was submitted to the Minister of Interior at the time, and the government did approve this proposal, and look at the joke, so to speak, only 22 or 32 persons from the whole of Tripoli were recruited into the state institutions. So just to give you an idea as how the state dealt with Tripoli. Mustafa, back to the idea of protest. Jana, I want to listen to you. I know you are on the ground most of the time, and you were covering many of the crises, many of the ramifications, many of the implications of the protests. Some would say we are wronging the protesters when we say they are the poor. But the protest that started on 17th of October had political claims and social claims, and it created some solidarity. It attracted some solidarity from all areas. But the most recent protest took a different rhythm and had a different tone. And Samir tried to say that there were certain infiltrators and vandalizers. Who were the participants in the recent protests? Were they infiltrators? Were they alien to the government? Were they not of the social fabric of the city? Why did the protesters not protect the city? I didn't use just to a point of correction, I did not use the word infiltrators. Do you hear me?
سمعتك سمر.
نعم سمعني أنا هلأ.
Do you hear me?
هلا إذا بدنا نبلش نحن اليوم بشو صار مؤخرا بطرابلس.
If we are to revisit what happened in Tripoli, we need to go back to the moment of 17 October. The difference in the landscape between 17 October and the post-17 October, and what happened on the one hand, and what happened and the most recent protests, the results were so logical. What happened was so logical. The economic situation, the economic pressures, the currency issue. And yes, we do. It's a fact that Tripoli has the highest number of popular areas and people who are only daily wage earners. So these people who were somewhat coexisting with this level of poverty, with the economic crisis and with the currency depreciation problem, they realize that they are diving into a newer depths of poverty. But since the start of the activism in Lebanon, the revolutions in Lebanon, Tripoli had its way of doing things, and everyone was stopping at what's happening. Tripoli, despite all its controversial backgrounds, Tripoli was the first city, and Tripoli showed us and proved that it has the capability, it has the ability to stand up to political affiliations. All the pictures of political figures were torn away in Tripoli. And this is something that we cannot easily see in another area in Lebanon that has a specific political or religious nature. So Tripoli, after 17th of October, showed us or proved to us that it has in its nature the ability, the tendency, the inclination to rebel, to stand up, to revolt. Many groups took to the streets in Tripoli, from Bab el-Ramel, from Debit Bene, and the civil society from everywhere. Civil society, lawyers, doctors, social actors, and activists. Also, men, women, all different age groups. So this picture, as a journalist being on the ground, since it started to change, it was scary. And how did we see the first signals of change? If you if you look at the minassa, maybe someone would take it so lightly or underestimate us talking about al-minassa. Al-minassa, the platform, showed us so many exceptional scenes, like battles, who would lead on, or clashes over who is going to lead on the platform, and so on and so forth. If we're not going to say, if we are going to put aside the factor of vandalizers or infiltrators, there was some security manipulation inside Tripoli, and that appeared, that showed on some people who were so blunt in expressing their political allegiances or security allegiances. The first time that Tripoli had seen confrontations, it was in Bedawi. It was around October 17. Confrontations in Bedawi that replicates the battles between Tripoli and the LAF. After the security strategy had been implemented, we don't know why that every time there are incidents in Tripoli, the LAF is on the ground, unlike all other areas in Lebanon. So all of a sudden, we started to see the same scenario, the Tripoli facing the LAF, Tripoli killing the soldiers, or so that sheds light on the political rhetoric that is being used, and trying to portray Tripoli as always on the defense. What was the rhetoric that the civil activists produced in order to address these charges? If there is a cause, true cause, and these are unjust charges, the problem is that there was no alternative. Samir and Mustafa both know, in Tripoli, like any other city in Lebanon, we lack in the alternative. In Tripoli, there were many political tents, political debates, proposing new political discourse, but they were challenged, they were combated, they were defied. In Bebe Tibeni, they would portray them as the state delegate. I was doing a report in Bebe Tibeni. So they would mention to you the state delegate, Mandub al-Dawli. Who is that? He would be a person who has relations with state security, state institutions, or political parties. Some of the civilians in the tents in Sahat al-Nur, in the Nur Square, tried to propose a new discourse, but they were challenged, they were prosecuted. Also, the civil society, the largest part of the civil society in Tripoli or in any other part of Lebanon. So the majority who are proposing themselves as political alternatives are using the same old ways in terms of distributing aid, distributing medical support. It's like they're using these for political gains, for electoral gains. Samer, who's funding? Who's funding?
بس قبل سامر انا يعني بخصوص التمويل اليوم هيدا خطاب
Concerning funding,
اي شخص حامل معه تمويل هو يعني كثير صعب انت تكشفي.
It's really difficult actually to identify the fund sources. If we to put funds aside, because Lebanon has a long fledgling history in terms of financing and funds. To answer your question, why would the civil society not answer these charges? The civil society actually was actually using the same old ways of the state. And Tripoli, unfortunately, due to the economic situation and the financial constraints, Tripoli has started to shrink its claims because of the more basic claims that people have. People want bread and fuel. So back to the question, who took to the street after the many battles between the LAF, and it's not an innocent coincidence, the LAF and the people are battling and both are losing people. At the end of eventually people withdrew. Those people with legitimate political project for the country. So they withdrew and the landscape started to change. What happened 4 days ago in Tripoli, towards like end of Jan, how it started, how did it start, how did it end, why 4 days, why did it end in setting the municipality ablaze? The detainees, accusing them of being ISIL affiliates. Through Bebe Tabene and we started, and through the different battles, we started to get used to the security expressions, how the leaders of the axis or the leaders of the factions. Let me go back to the terminology issue later. Samer, a question to you. After 17 October, where there new civil groups were born, where are they today? What are the common denominators? What are their claims? What are their headlines? The city is still left behind. It's still marginalized. It's still in dire poverty. Where are they? One point. When we say security bodies in Tripoli, we mean political ruling. Everybody, every political party had a security body or authority in Tripoli. Yes, we don't have militias, to answer the speaker before. If you want to analyze the small security events in Tripoli, you wouldn't get anywhere, because Tripoli is governed by security bodies that are in turn governed by political parties. Security bodies are controlling all the strings of the game in Tripoli. They're not security bodies, they're political bodies. Just to be direct and very straightforward in discussing things, we don't have security bodies, we have political. bodies. And the relationship with the people on the ground would differ based on affiliations. That would require another set of discussions. As for the groups that were born and emerged after 17 October, let's explain what happened of 17 October. For 15 years, we had Syrian occupation. You cannot object. You cannot stand up. Opposition were died, detained. After 2005, we adopted consensual democracy and that weird Lebanese phenomenon where you don't have opposition. There's one government of unity government with no opposition. And we didn't see opposition, proper opposition over the last years. No opposition against this regime, a regime that we had been saying up and loud that we are against it for the last 15 years. So 2019, we were not ready. That's one. Without political experience, we cannot stand up to those political waves. We're just a group of people. We're not united or unified frameworks. We're not unified settings. We're not political parties. We're just a group of people saying no to a political regime. You cannot stand up to those waves. The problem of those groups is that they kept the talks to themselves. They talked to one another. They didn't talk to the people. And that means they're not doing politics. They're not practicing politics. They're doing elite. Their problem is that they don't have vision, no experience, and no program. As long as they are not organized, they will not get anywhere. I am trying to be as straightforward and as clear as possible. And there is another issue here. What is being called or labeled as the elitist group in this city, they're either politically affiliated or they're not interested in the public affairs. This does not mean that those groups cannot do anything. I am sure that after 17 of October, after that moment, that tender moment that was created after on 17 of October, that moment that created a dream that we're attached to. What we need to do is think realistically about frameworks, propose new thoughts, new ideas, and fight, but not in the same old and traditional ways. What are the new ways you're suggesting, Bassam? Now, those groups are trying to organize themselves, to organize their ranks, and that's good, but it might take some time. And we cannot expect them to be the solution or the alternative after 30 years of political desertification, so to speak. If I ask them, what we were asking them, we needed them to be politically active, because what happened in 17 of October, that was a confrontation between the people and a group of thieves. People now, we're far now from the revolution. People had lost their trust in the revolution. Now we have, as groups, to reorganize themselves. In 6 or 7 months, those groups cannot and are not expected to be the alternative. But we need to adopt a new way of fighting. Did they propose a new discourse, a new rhetoric to the public, to the street? Yes. Because the people are still so reined in by the constants imposed by the government. No, those groups, if you put them if you have them face any political activist, there would be no room for comparison. They have a good discourse. In the Tripoli protest, there were very brilliant statements that were issued with clear claims, clear demands, and the discourse was very straightforward. Let's be realistic. Blaming the 17th of October groups, you cannot. Samer, you're right. They issued very bold statements that attracted many good opinions. Maybe the problem is that there was some gap. Maybe they suffered a setback from a setback. The reality is that we're still stuck in the romance of 17th of October. We're using the same ways, just calling the people to take to the streets. We're using the same language to talk to the people. But also, more importantly, we're not talking to the people. When you don't talk to the people, you lose politically. Mustafa, what does the people want to break their captivating relationship with the politicians in Tripoli? What do people want? And I believe both parties should answer the questions. The state institutions should answer it, and the people. Generally speaking, people want their basic services. They want access to their basic services, health, education, job employment, job opportunities, employment, etc. But more importantly, what people want in Tripoli is something more essential to them. Have free Tripoli from a security presence or omnipresence, so to speak, because every 2 meters you would have a security checkpoint. Not because the people do not want to see the state present, not because they want to be outlaws, but the exaggerated security attention is not comfortable. On the opposite, it makes people ask so many question marks as to what is being prepared for this city. And we have history telling us a lot, like if we revisit the Doniye incidents, or then Sheikh al-Absi and Fath al-Islam. So the history is filled with these security incidents. Back to Shakir al-Absi. And who's Fath al-Islam? So the point is, the exaggerated security attention to Tripoli is scary because it always leads us to dark hypotheses and assumptions. Something is being prepared for the city. And the moment you have something happening, you would have you have some weird deployments of people who are not part of the fabric of the society, and things would degenerate into violence. Also, the set of series of violent events and security events and the spread of weapons in Tripoli over the years have led to the current situation. I'm not a fan of the conspiracy theory, but putting this theory aside, there still are legitimate questions about what's happening. Why is Tripoli being treated the same way out of all Lebanese cities? The question is legitimate, and no one is able to answer it. The answer would be this security issue should be dealt with in that way, this or that way. And a while later, you would find that a couple of guys talking to one another over Telegram that are arrested, and they are being charged for terrorism or extremism. So we have legitimate questions here. So what discourse to adopt? Even the discourse that October 17 adopted was repetitive. Mustafa, let me stop you here because we have a lot of questions coming in. Khaldun al-Sharif is Khaldun al-Sharif said before that Tripoli has always been the weak or soft spot of Lebanon as being used to intimidate the people. Those young are very steadfast to the soil. Immunizing and fortifying Tripoli is the prelude to the solution. How can we do that? You want me, you want to trap me, you're leading me into trouble, I believe. I don't want to repeat myself. The problem in Tripoli, 2011, 2013, look how the state looks at the city. Economy is destroyed. All enterprises closed down. The youth emigrated. What did the state do? Security strategy. The security agencies and the government devised a security strategy to be adopted after the battles had been over. So you destroy the city and then you create a security strategy rather than an economic strategy, because you cannot reconstruct Tripoli by sending people to jail. You reconstruct Tripoli by building the economy and doing some development. Tripoli is not a poor city. A while ago, I was researching, preparing for an article. I was reading about the Cedars Conference allocations to Tripoli. More than 70 million US dollars were to be funneled to the sewage system, the sanitation systems in Tripoli. The city of Tripoli doesn't have sanitation, does not have sewage systems. You're talking about security for reinforcement. The city has a station, a refinery station. The city has the capacity of using that station and providing employment to 6,000 people. Provide jobs to those people. So if you want to do something, you wouldn't start from security. If you want to change the situation in Tripoli, you wouldn't start from security. Tripoli has the most important strategic location in the region. All the world is based on supply chains and logistics. We have the most important strategic location, the most important port, and the most important economic zone. So you want to develop Tripoli? You start from that, from those areas, from those sectors, not from the security. I hear about economic plan, not security plan. Yahya Maulud is saying it's wrong to blame the victims for the failure of the state. Jana, a question. The groups, the opposition groups in Tripoli, are they getting ready for the electoral the elections, like the secondary ones? We need to answer first, who are the civil groups? The second question is, what's the program? What are they doing on the ground? Based on my experience, I don't see any prospects here, because you might have candidates, people presenting themselves to the public scene, but we still cannot speak about a real force in Tripoli. If parliamentary elections are to happen in 2022, we can still not say that we are heading towards a political change. But that does not mean that the political landscape is not going to change in Tripoli. It changed actually since 2018. Even though Hariri and Meati reaped almost all the seats, we can't forget that Tripoli had seen the least percentage of turnout in those elections that led to the so we're talking about 23% of participation or turnout. If we are to take the latest elections, the secondary elections, 23%. Those 75% who did not vote, why did they abstain from voting? Let's look at this from a different angle. Who would motivate them to vote? That's what I was trying to say. Those did not vote either because they are desperate, or to vote they need to find an alternative. We cannot blame the civil society. We cannot blame them. Unfortunately, the state is still very strong. After what you see since the explosion of Beirut port and the tug of war, the political tug of war in like the discussions to form the government, everything that is happening is showing us that the state is still strong. And how will that impact on Tripoli? The difficult economic situation in Tripoli delays any possibility of the emergence of the alternative, because people are so preoccupied with their daily needs, their basic necessities. Even the social activism that is now there is not is focusing on the daily life, on the necessities demands. The political element is absent. Samir was saying that the civil society is not talking to the people. People have different priorities without a civil society. Identifying with the needs of the people and not providing a traditional alternative. And when we say alternative, we mean
جنى خليني انطلق من
a strong entity that can stand up to the government. Let me move to Samir based on what you're saying.
نقول توجهت لهم تهم بالإرهاب.
The men who were detained were charged with terrorism and theft, and it's only expected. The citizens of Tripoli who want to see change, did they get themselves ready to a confrontation with the judicial system? Is there a plan to stand up to this, to confront? The goal is to have the city exploding. It's not a small number when we say 24 men detained, and I know many of them. And I'm certain that they have nothing to do with the charges addressed to them. Before I answer you, you might have interpreted or misinterpreted what I was saying, that I am blaming the civil society organizations. No, I'm proud to be part of this group, the group of the 17 October people. When I blame them for something, I would be blaming myself. It's only a matter of constructive criticism. Back to Tripoli. The decision or the goal is to explode, to have the city exploded. We are facing two scenarios. The opposition in Tripoli is looking into a way to confront this decision. They are aware that the objective is not justice. It's the decision is not only targeting those 24 or 32 people, it's targeting every opposition member, every person who's opposing the state, everywhere in Lebanon. And let me open a parenthesis here. Sometimes they would make a difference between the groups of Tripoli and Beirut and other areas. And sometimes they focus more on Tripoli. It might be true, but the groups in Beirut and other areas should sympathize with Tripoli. In other words, this city took to the streets in October, and on many occasions they were on their own. In Tripoli last year was the year. Tripoli last year was the city that had seen the most closures of schools. So the question, Darine, is not only to the people of Tripoli, is for all the people, because what's happening is another attempt to silence us and to take us back to the time of Rustam Ghazali. Yes, the people in Tripoli are trying their best, but they are shackled with a security situation. So there is so much that they can do. The groups and people in Beirut and Bekaa, we want them to take to the streets and show solidarity with Tripoli.
سامر بعتقد وقتنا خلص صارت
We ran out of time.
مثل الجلسة الماضية أسئلة كتير تفتح طرابلس وبتستحق
Like the last session, many questions we have many questions on Tripoli, and it's really important to delve into the details. And we can never be able to diagnose we will never be able to understand all the nuances and the details of what's happening. The city of Tripoli is so important, it's so worthy of us discussing it and looking into its problems. I believe that this will be an issue that we are going to discuss in the coming months. We need to keep shedding light on this issue. Let me add just one remark to what Samir was saying.
اللي كان عم يذكره سامر بموضوع انه طرابلس والحراك اللي فيها وتعامل
Samir was talking about the need to show solidarity to Tripoli. I would like to say something. When Prime Minister Hariri resigned, and people were taking to the streets and expressing anger. It was Tripoli, if I remember, that took people back to the right course of the revolution, rebelling and revolting even against Hariri. So we need to bear that in mind.
طب وصلنا لآخر النقاش. إذا بتسمحوا لي
We ran out of time, and allow me on my behalf and on behalf of Nadine to thank you for this discussion. It was, yes, as you said, it was extremely important that we open this discussion. We wanted deliberately to include the people of Tripoli in this discussion, have people who are versed in the issues of Tripoli. I believe we have more appetite now for discussing this issue further in more workshops. Maybe I will discuss it with Nadim to see how we can carry on with this discussion. It seems it is. I see it in the questions in the chat. People are asking, people are saying you didn't answer the question, what are the solutions? We cannot answer all of these questions right now. So let's find a way to carry on, to carry on with this discussion more and later. Thank you again. I learned a lot from you today. Thank you, Darine, for the great management and moderation of this session. Nadim, I leave it to you. I want to thank you all. I want to thank the interpreters. Yes, it is clear. We need to carry on with this discussion. There are many ideas on the table. We need to take it further. Yes, you might be right. We've raised more questions rather than finding solutions, but a solution starts with asking the right questions. It was important today to listen to the people of Tripoli who, being journalists, activists, researchers, without having an external or a helicopter lens on what's happening in Tripoli. Thank you all. And maybe after COVID is over, we'd be able to convene this session in Tripoli itself, and we include more people from Tripoli. Thank you.
صباح الخير جميعا. باي باي.
Right.